The morning I drove back into Harlan County, Kentucky, I almost didn't recognize the road. 8 years changes a lot of things. The gas station on Route 119 was gone. The diner where my wife used to get her coffee every Sunday morning had become a cell phone repair shop. Even the mountains looked different somehow. Smaller, like they'd shrunk while I was away. Or maybe I'd just forgotten how close they crowded in on either side of the valley. I'd been working the oil fields up in the Prudhoe Bay region of Alaska for most of those 8 years. Not glamorous work, cold, brutal, isolating work. But it paid well, better than anything I could find in eastern Kentucky for a man with a mechanical engineering background and a daughter's college fund to rebuild after a bad divorce settlement had gutted my savings in 2011. I had a plan: work the contracts, bank the money, come back when I had enough to do things right. The plan stopped working the night a pressure valve blew on Platform 7 and set me into a wall hard enough to fracture my skull in two places. I spent 11 days in a hospital in Anchorage, then 6 weeks in a rehabilitation facility. I had gaps in my memory that the doctors called transient and likely to resolve. Some of them did. Some of them did. For almost 3 months, I couldn't reliably remember my own cell phone number, let alone manage international calls or coordinate with anyone back home. By the time I was coherent enough to try reaching my family, something had already gone wrong with the number I had for my son. Disconnected. I assumed he'd switched carriers. I wrote letters. I asked my field supervisor to send word through the company's family notification system, which apparently had an address error on file that nobody caught. I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for me for any of that. I know how it sounds. I know exactly how it sounds, because I sat in that rehabilitation facility and I told myself the same things any reasonable person would say. You should have tried harder. You should have found another way. And maybe that's true. I spent a lot of nights since then turning that over, but here's what I came home to. I pulled off the main road onto the gravel drive that led up to the property about 11 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. I'd bought the land in 2009, 14 acres outside Harlan, a farmhouse built in the 1940s that I'd spent 2 summers renovating, plus a detached workshop I'd wired and plumbed myself. I'd signed a deed over to a family trust before I left for Alaska, with my brother listed as the secondary trustee. The arrangement was supposed to protect the property for my son while I was gone. My son's name is Caleb. He was 16 when I left. He'd be 24 now. I expected to pull up and see the house the way I'd left it. Maybe a little rundown. I expected to knock on the door and have an awkward conversation and then start the process of explaining everything that had happened and rebuilding something that the distance had damaged. I did not expect to see my son in the side yard, on his knees in the mud, replacing a section of corroded drainage pipe along the foundation wall. I sat in the truck for a moment before I got out. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe it wasn't him, but he stood up to reach for a tool on the ground, and I saw his face. Older, thinner, a beard he didn't have before, and it was my son. He was wearing work clothes that weren't his. A gray uniform shirt with a logo on the breast pocket. The kind of shirt you wear when you work for someone else. I got out of the truck. He looked up, squinted at me the way you squint at a stranger. "Can I help you?" he said. I don't have words for what that felt like. I've tried to find them and I can't. I just stood there on the gravel and said, "Caleb." He went very still. "Caleb, it's me," I said. "It's your father." He stared at me for a long time. His jaw tightened. He looked back at the pipe, then at the house, then at me again. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "Son, I'm serious." His voice was controlled, but there was something under it, something I recognized from when he was a teenager trying not to cry. "You need to get back in your truck and go. If he sees you here, it gets bad for us." "If who sees me? Who are you talking about?" He looked at the house again. The curtain in the front window moved. "Come around back," he said, just barely above a whisper. "Don't knock on the front door. Just come around to the workshop. Give me 10 minutes." I waited in the workshop. It had been emptied out. My tools, my workbench, my compressor, everything gone. The shelves were bare. A folding table and 2 plastic chairs were the only things left in a room I'd built with my own hands. When Caleb came in, he closed the door behind him and stood with his back against it. He wouldn't look at me directly at first. I asked him what was going on. He told me it took him a long time. He stopped several times and started over. I didn't push. I just sat in one of those plastic chairs and I listened to my son tell me what the last 8 years had looked like from his side. After my accident, when the communications broke down, my brother, I'll call him what he is, which is the man I trusted most in the world for 60 years, began telling people I was dead. Not right away. He waited. He let enough time pass that the story would be believable. Then he had an attorney file a death in absentia petition with the county court, using affidavits from two people I didn't recognize when Caleb described them. The petition was granted. The family trust dissolved. The property transferred to my brother's name by court order. Caleb was 17 at the time. He was told that his father was gone, that the estate had to be settled, and that his uncle was going to take care of things. His mother, my ex-wife, had remarried and moved to Tennessee. She didn't contest anything. I don't know if he was told the full story or just a version of it. My son turned 18 in a house that was no longer legally his. He'd been working on the property since he was old enough to work, maintaining the equipment, keeping the grounds, doing the repairs. My brother kept him on, called it room and board. Let him live in the small bedroom off the kitchen. Paid him almost nothing. I tried to leave once, Caleb said. He was finally looking at me. When I was 20, I got a job offer over in Lexington. Good job, construction management, entry level, but it had a future. What happened? He hesitated. Lily got sick. Lily is his half-sister. My ex-wife's daughter from her second marriage. She's 12 years old and she has type 1 diabetes. After my ex-wife died of a stroke 2 years ago, something Caleb told me with the careful flatness of someone who'd already processed the grief alone, Lily came to live on the property. There was nobody else. She needs insulin, Caleb said. She needs a continuous glucose monitor. She needs supplies. It's not cheap. My uncle controls the insurance on this property. He controls everything. He told me directly that if I caused problems, if I tried to make things difficult for him legally, Lily's coverage would disappear. He stopped. She's 12 years old. I couldn't take that chance. I sat with that for a while. How long has this been going on? I asked. Which part? All of it. He looked at his hands. Since I was 17. I didn't go to my brother's door that afternoon. I'm going to be clear about that, because what I did instead was more effective and considerably more permanent. I drove to Lexington that evening and I checked into a hotel. I called an attorney I'd been referred to by a colleague in Alaska, a man named Edward Forsythe who handled estates and civil fraud cases, and who, when I explained the situation over the phone, was quiet for a long time before he said, "Mr. Garrett, I'm going to need you to come in tomorrow morning with everything you have." Everything I had, it turned out, was quite a lot. I had my original deed to the property. I had the trust documents I'd signed in 2009, notarized and filed. I had my employment contracts from Alaska, 8 years of them, with dates, with payroll records, with incident reports from the accident and medical records from the Anchorage hospital. I had letters I'd sent that were never responded to. I had a paper trail that, once a forensic accountant got hold of it 2 weeks later, told a very specific story about what my brother had done and when he had done it. The death in absentia petition, it turned out, had been based on fraudulent affidavits. The two witnesses who testified to my death were my brother's neighbor and a man who worked part-time at his hardware store. Neither of them had any direct knowledge of my circumstances. They'd signed documents they apparently hadn't read carefully, or had been told what they were signing didn't really matter. It mattered. Edward filed to vacate the death in absentia order on a Friday. By the following Thursday, a judge in Harlan County had granted a temporary injunction freezing any transfer or encumbrance of the property pending a full hearing. My brother's attorney called Edward's office 4 times that week. Edward returned none of the calls. I stayed in Lexington. Caleb came down to meet me on the second weekend, without telling my brother where he was going. He brought Lily. She's a small, serious girl who looks at you with these very level eyes and says exactly what she thinks. She told me she'd heard about me, that her brother talked about me sometimes when he thought she wasn't listening. She said she was glad I wasn't dead. I told her I was glad about that too. We sat in a diner on New Circle Road, and I ordered coffee, and Caleb ordered coffee, and Lily had a hot chocolate. And I watched my son talk for the first time in 8 years without looking over his shoulder. He kept catching himself doing it, and then stopping and shaking his head a little, like he was reminding himself that he didn't have to. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now it goes through the courts," I said. "Edward says 6 months, maybe 8. There'll be depositions. Your uncle will have to explain the affidavits. The witnesses will have to explain why they signed them. And the property? The property is mine. That's not in question. The only question is what else he's liable for." He nodded slowly. He picked up his coffee cup and put it down without drinking from it. "He's going to say you abandoned us," he said. "That's what he's been telling people for years, that you walked away and never looked back." I know. People believed him. I know that too. He was quiet. Outside the window, traffic moved past on a gray October afternoon. A woman walked a dog on the sidewalk. Normal things. The world going about its business while we sat inside this particular moment. "I sent letters," I said. "Every month for 2 years before the accident, then more after, when I could. I have copies of most of them, drafts at least. I kept a notebook." I paused. "I don't know if any of them got through." "None of them did," Caleb said. I figured. He looked at me. "I thought you chose it. I thought you just chose the job over us. And then it became easier not to come back. And then eventually you were just gone." He stopped. "I spent a long time being angry at you. That's fair. It's not, though, now that I know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything with it right now," I said. "There's no deadline." Lily reached across the table and put her hand over his. She didn't say anything, just left it there. He looked down at her hand, and something in his face changed, went softer, and then steadier, the way a river looks when it passes from rough water into a quiet stretch. The hearing was in March. I drove back to Harlan County for it. I sat across a conference table from my brother for the first time in 8 years, and I watched him look at the documents Edward had compiled, the medical records, the employment contracts, the notarized trust, the phone records, the notebook I'd kept, and I watched the particular expression of a man who understands that the story he's been telling has run out of room. His attorney asked for a continuance. The judge denied it. The death in absentia order was vacated. The property was returned to the original trust. My brother was ordered to provide a full accounting of the property's finances for the preceding 8 years. Every dollar of rental income, every transaction, every expense he'd run through the estate account that had legally been mine. He hasn't spoken to me since. That's fine. I have nothing I need to say to him that isn't already in a court filing. Caleb and Lily moved out of the property the week after the hearing. They stayed with me in Lexington while the legal process continued. In May, they came back to Harlan with me. The house needed work, 8 years of deferred maintenance, and my brother had let some things go. The roof over the back addition had developed a soft spot. The kitchen needed new flooring. The workshop was bare and would take time to put back together. I didn't mind. I bought new lumber at the hardware store in town and loaded it into the truck myself. Caleb drove separately and met me at the property. We unloaded together without talking much, just moving the boards from the truck to the side yard in the thin May sunlight. And I thought about the last time I'd done any real physical work in this place. 2016, before I left, when I'd reshingled the garage roof over a long August weekend. Caleb set down his end of a board and stretched his back. "It's bigger than I remembered," he said, looking at the house. "You were living in it. I know, but I never really looked at it." He paused. "I think I stopped seeing it. It was just where I had to be." I nodded. "I want to learn how to do the roof," he said. "If you're willing to show me, I'm willing." He picked the board back up. We carried it the rest of the way to the stack. Edward settled the financial accounting case the following September. My brother agreed to a consent judgment. He didn't admit to the fraud explicitly, the way these things usually go, but he paid back every dollar the accounting showed had come through the estate during the 8 years I was legally dead. The number was substantial, more than I expected. It covered the cost of Lily's medical care for years to come, and then some. I didn't throw a party. I didn't call anyone to celebrate. I sat on the porch that evening with a cup of coffee, and watched the light go off the ridge and thought about all the things that could have been said and done differently by different people at different points. And I let myself feel the weight of that for a while without trying to put it somewhere useful. My son came out and sat in the other chair. He had a coffee too. We watched the same ridge. After a while, he said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about the letters." "Yeah, I want to read them," he said. "The copies you have. The notebook. Whenever you're ready." "I think I'm ready." I went inside and got the notebook. It's a standard composition book, black and white cover, the kind you buy in a drugstore. I'd filled about two-thirds of it over the years. Not journal entries exactly, just notes, thoughts, things I'd wanted to say to him. Draft sentences that never found their way into envelopes, that never found their way through. Evidence of absence, I suppose. Proof that something was being held in mind even when it couldn't get through. I handed it to him and he held it in both hands and looked at the cover for a long time before he opened it. I went back inside and let him read. Some things don't need a witness. Some things you hand over and step back from and let the other person have in private because it belongs to them more than it ever belonged to you. That notebook was one of them. The ridge went dark. The porch light came on automatically. Somewhere down the valley a dog barked twice and then stopped. I could hear Lily watching something on her tablet in the back bedroom, the thin sound of it coming through the screen door. Normal things. The world, carrying on. I stood at the kitchen window, drank my coffee, and thought, this is what I came back for. Not the land, not the court judgment, not the accounting, this. The light on, the house occupied, the kid in the back room. My son on the porch reading words I wrote for him in the dark 8 years ago when I didn't know if he'd ever see them. That's the part I hold on to. Everything else, the fraud, the lost years, the brother who stood in the courtroom and wouldn't meet my eyes. All of that is real, and all of it mattered, and none of it is what I think about when I think about coming home. What I think about is Caleb's face when he looked up from that drainage pipe and didn't know who I was. And then, weeks later, the same face when he finally did. I've thought a lot about what my brother was counting on. Not just legally, I mean what he believed about human nature when he decided to do what he did. He was counting on time doing his work for him. The longer I was gone, the more the story would calcify, the more Caleb would accept things as they were. The more the paperwork would look routine to anyone who glanced at it. He was betting that the world rewards people who act early and decisively, even when what they're doing is wrong, because most people who've been wronged either don't find out or don't have the resources to fight back. He wasn't entirely wrong about how the world works. He was just wrong about me. I think about Caleb on his knees in the mud that October morning, replacing a drainage pipe on land that was legally no longer his, wearing a uniform shirt with someone else's logo on it. He was 24 years old. He'd been doing that kind of work, maintaining, fixing, holding things together, since he was 17, with no recognition, no real pay, and no apparent future. And he'd stayed. Not because he was weak, because Lily needed her insulin, and he wasn't willing to gamble with the 12-year-old's life to preserve his own freedom. That's not weakness. That took more discipline than most people I've known in 60 years would have managed. What I keep returning to is this. The choices we make when nobody is watching, when there's no reward, and no applause, and no guarantee that anyone will ever know we made them, those are the choices that actually define what we are. Caleb made that choice over and over again for years. He could have walked away. He could have told himself it wasn't his responsibility. He was a kid who'd been told his father was dead, and his uncle was the authority now. Nobody would have blamed him. He stayed anyway. I didn't teach him that. I wasn't there to teach him anything during those years. Whatever he built in himself, he built without me. That's both the hardest thing I carry and the thing I'm most proud of. This son I raised until he was 16 and then lost track of for 8 years, came through that stretch of his life with his integrity intact. More than intact. As for what happened to my brother, I'll say this. What he did cost him everything he'd spent years accumulating. The money, the property, the reputation. The 2 men who signed those affidavits were deposed, and the picture that emerged was not a flattering one for anyone involved. He had calculated that greed was a reasonable trade for family. He found out it wasn't. That's not justice in any grand sense. It's just cause and effect. You build your life on something false, eventually. The structure fails. It doesn't always happen on a schedule anyone would choose, but in my experience, it happens. What I want to say to anyone who hears this story and recognizes something in it, whether you're the one who was left behind, or the one who left, or the one who's been quietly holding something together while waiting for circumstances to change, is just this. Keep your accounting honest. Know what you actually did and what was actually done to you. Don't let someone else's version of events replace your own memory of the truth. And don't confuse endurance with defeat. Sometimes enduring is the most intelligent and courageous thing available to you, and the proof of that doesn't always arrive on time, but it does arrive. Caleb read that notebook cover to cover on the porch that evening. I don't know how long it took. When I came back outside later, he had it closed in his hands, and he was just sitting there looking at the ridge. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "You wrote a lot. I had a lot to say." He nodded, set the notebook on the small table between our chairs, picked up his coffee. We sat there until it got cold, and that was enough.